Chapter 7. Friendly Fire. If one reads historical accounts of the first assault at Monte Cassino, they understood how totally unprepared the Americans were for what was about to happen. A monumental, still controversial screw-up that's been chronicled in several books. U.S. General Mark Clark made a huge tactical blunder. Working in conjunction with the British Army, he had not anticipated such a committed German defense, certainly not the strong counter-offense the Jerry's mounted at the time. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20, but at the time we had no idea what was in store for us, so we did what we were trained to do, obey orders. Here's where the politics also enter the equation, and the cost of a lot of American lives. The Germans were entrenched around Monte Cassino, the ancient home of the Benedictine monks. It was an irreplaceable historic shrine that has been declared off-limits as a bombing target. Now occupied by the Germans, the abbey was being used for observation and defense. The army had to be dislodged if there was any hope for a successful invasion, but the Allied world thought it was improper to destroy the ancient citadel. Thus, we could not take it by storming the heights or reducing the site to a pile of rubble by siege guns or destructive aircraft bombings. This gave the Germans an incredible advantage. They not only held high ground, but they also controlled the entire battlefield because they could easily view any and all tactical movements by their enemy for an impregnable perch. Allied soldiers were therefore forced to endure constant shelling and many lives were lost. My unit's mission was to lay the groundwork for what was named Operation Shingle. Our crossing was to be attempted in the vicinity of the S-bend of the Rapido River, the southernmost section of the Gustav defensive line. The plan was simple. Companies A, B, and C would cross first in the rubber assault boats and launch the attack, followed by the rifle companies of the 3rd Battalion, who were in the beginning of their crossing 1 hour later. They were supposed to cross on footbridges to be installed in the meantime, north and south of the S-bend. Supporting weapons and battalion headquarter units of both battalions would then follow across the bridges. The engineers had been directed to install an 8-ton infantry-to-support bridge by midnight to enable anti-tank guns and other support vehicles to cross the river. These engineers were also supposed to furnish guides to help us safely navigate the minefields we had to pass to run our way to the crossing sites. Initial intelligence information indicated that the mission would be extremely hazardous. The Germans had done everything possible to prohibit a successful crossing. Both banks of the river were heavily mined and covered by interlocking weapons fires and mortar concentrations. Once across, we faced a cleverly constructed obstacle of double apron wire fence. The Germans had also cut trees on the other side, enabling clear observation of our movements and open lanes of fire. The stream's swift current swirled along at more than 5 miles per hour. The channel of water wasn't more than 30 to 45 feet wide in any place, but it cut through vertical banks from 3 or 4 feet high, dropping away abruptly at a depth of 10 to 12 feet. Dare I say it again? This was an ill-conceived operation from the get-go. The collapsible rubber boats provided were completely inadequate for the crossing. Often, as the boats were inflated and carried to the riverbank, small shell fragments punctured the rubber, making them useless. If a boat did launch, the current was too swift and the boats capsized readily. 5 of the 7 boats used by the reconnaissance patrols on the night of January 17th had been lost, and yet we were still commanded to board these floating death traps. Ill-conceived or not, the pre-dawn hours of January 20th, finally preparations were complete. We headed out at first light. The fog did so dense that you couldn't see your boots. I was in the lead company, carrying my machine gun, my ammo bearers right behind. Air support was supposed to protect us from the German artillery positions on the far hill, but luck and the weather were both against us. The thick fog did not lift and thus prevented the planes from taking off, which meant we were basically on our own. Even before reaching the river's edge, the assignment was brutal. Clear landmines that had been planted earlier to thwart a frontal attack. To make our task somewhat less difficult, the U.S. Army engineers had used white tape to mark the mines' locations for easy detection, but earlier artillery shells had fallen into the minefield, had reduced the marking tape to a tangled mess. To make matters worse, after we finally managed to claw our way out of the designated crossing point where the Rapido was more than 30 feet wide, several of our boats overturned in the swift current. Soldiers, made clumsy by their heavy packs, never had a chance. Many drowned without resurfacing. Once those of us who managed to make it safely across had landed and crawled up the steep bank, we began a second round of demolitions work. This time, our task was to clear the road that had been heavily mined by the Germans as another of our defense strategies. Consequently, we spent the entire day and night doing terrifying and treacherous duty. Most of my comrades were wounded or killed by German gunners or by accidentally stepping on and detonating undetonated explosives. Several times my life has been saved by flying debris and body parts which landed on other trigger mechanisms, detonating mines so cleverly concealed that I would not have found them. As I slipped and slid in the blood-soaked terrain, I became so accustomed to terror that I had turned numb, being nothing more than a machine, methodically disabling the deadly devices while expecting at any moment to be blown to pieces by one that I had inadvertently missed.